In the G1 Transformers toy line, the Decepticons had some really awesome looking designs. Shockwave, among them, definitely did not let down. This is one of the coolest looking Transformers. Today, we're going to talk about all the toys made for Shockwave. We're going to look at this character and is he just a lonely soul on Cybertron or secretly the next leader of the Decepticons? Let's get into this. As a G1 toy, this figure was one of the better looking figures and matched their on-screen counterpart pretty close. Now, aside from the skinny legs and slightly different colors of purple, it still looked great, and compared to the majority of the G1 figures, definitely matched the on-screen counterparts very well. It was a second gun, so transformed into a gun, and of course, had its roots from another toy line. It was originally a Toyco 4-changeable Astro Magnum. Also was used as a Radio Shack exclusive called Galactic Man, both of which featured a charcoal gray color scheme as opposed to the purple that we saw in the G1. And the G1 figure did have electronic lights and sounds. It was quite a fun toy, definitely for the time. Later on in the G1 era, they did make an Action Masters, which was smaller, not very poseable, but more along lines to match the other Action Masters. We did get an alternators and a Vinyl Tech version, and this turned into an RX-8. And this is the early days of early engineering that sort of led to the direction we went with Masterpiece. And as awesome as Shockwave was as both a character and as a toy, he got a lot of cancellations, or at least Titanium series figure was canceled, and that would have made for one of the better Titanium figures because looking at this, the alt mode and the bot mode look pretty good. Another canceled figure is the MMC Cyclops, but it's not so much a Shockwave thing, but I think the whole Stelian scientist just got dropped. They stopped making or canceled plans on making that whole line, so he's kind of a victim of circumstance. In the Fall of Cybertron series, Shockwave took on a tank mode and was a much skinnier version than we've seen in the past. But this was sort of a step towards G1 or back towards G1, but not 100%. In the Transformers Prime Beast Hunters, this figure had a tank, turned into a tank, kind of like the other one, but this one was a bit beefier, and not quite going super G1 on this release either. Kind of going in its own direction, and that's kind of what they did for a while with this character. And Transformers Animated was definitely its own thing. You could tell it was still inspired by the original G1 character with the single eye and the shape of the head and sort of the shape of the chest. But overall, this was a great departure. Now, Walgreens sells their own version of a Shockwave, which is part of the Evergreen or Authentics line, basically meaning that they could sell this figure over and over and over for the next 10 years and not have any sort of media to push it, and it's going to be a lower cost item. And overall, it actually looks like one of the most G1-esque figures since G1 at the time they put it out. It's the scale of a Voyager with the price of a Deluxe and the engineering of Legends. Speaking of Legends, I did have a Legends version of this character. Now, the cool thing about this is it did form a gun. It was able to be held by other characters, and both modes looked pretty good. And so with the Legends line, they did a lot of great things. Hasbro made a lot of great figures in the Legends scale, and it really makes sense for this guy to be made in Legends scale because he turns into a gun and he's mostly an accessory. Now, this is what they call a bot shot, and it was something that was made real tiny. I've never dealt with them, but I think it's maybe a pullback and pop up and transform, maybe, or maybe not, I don't know. But it is kind of interesting looking, and they did kind of keep the head in line with the spirit of the character. And of course, if you're into Creo, there is a Creo Shockwave. There is a cloud version of Shockwave, which is a heavily retooled, well, not even heavily, just more or less a repaint of Whirl. And I think it was a good use of Whirl, but on the flip side, it does not match the character and all of the main points of the character, aside from partially on the head sculpt and the colors. Now in the Energon line, they did have Shock Blast. They had have some trouble with the name, and so they went with Shock Blast. So there's the origin of the Shock Blast name. And through the thunderous joy of gun laws, we don't have a gun on this guy either. He's this. And just for fun, we're going to throw in the old Tidal Wave. A lot of people refer to Tidal Wave as Shockwave, but I'm just going to say I don't see it. Now, Cyberverse made a pretty cool looking figure. Now, if you know Cyberverse, it's not going to have the greatest articulation, and the transformations are very simple, and of course is probably not going to live up to maybe some other counterparts in just the standard releases. But I think it actually is a little better than what they were selling in the Walgreens one. The modern day Siege figure is probably the best mainline that they've made yet. Now, although it does not have a mode in a gun mode for specifically a gun mode, you can make it look like a gun. And you can have all these extra parts if you want to. And of course, the Generation Selects has the Galactic Man Shockwave throwback, which is a repaint, and definitely a good use of a repaint. Getting into the live action movie space, we did get Shockwave as different scales. We had a leader class and we had a deluxe class version. He also had different repaints, and of course my favorite is the purple one because that's what color he should be. And if you look at the head actually does homage the G1 version. We also saw a last night Nitro Zeus, which isn't actually Shockwave, but does take on the Shockwave head, which is kind of a reason that a lot of people are interested in this Nitro Zeus figure. Now in the third-party realm and the Masterpiece realm, well, the KFC Mugen Aperture, I hope I'm saying that right, this figure is actually not big enough to be considered Masterpiece scale, but if you look and see the aesthetic and the cues that are there, a pretty cool looking figure, but not quite to Masterpiece level, scale, size. It'd work with your Chug collection. And of course, Takara made their own version of this figure. Of course, it transforms into a gun. Of course, it looks awesome in G1. The downside is the color was a bit lighter than what people expected. Now, as amazing as this mold is, and as it looks, it's very, very lightweight. And the color of it, well, it made even Takara want to change it. Takara recently put out their MP Plus version, which is more of a toy coloring than the toon coloring, but is actually more popular as this color because I think most collectors think the toy color was the best. And then even in with the animation, some of the shots, some of the cells showed it darker and closer to the toy. But of course, there's always the discussion of what's the color, what's the proper color, what's the appropriate color. I actually think the animation was somewhere in between. The first one that they made, they call it Lavender Wave for Shockwave or Laser Wave. But Lavender because he wasn't really truly purple, and the show is somewhere in between the Plus and the first release. So one of the earliest Fans Toys figures ever made was their Quakewave, which is their Shockwave. And a lot of people still really like this figure, and this come out in many different colors, some transparent versions, but in the end, you could tell this is Shockwave. This definitely harkens back to those key features that the G1 figure had and the G1 character had. One thing about this whole debate between whether Fans Toys was better or Takara's is better, we all know one thing. Looking at the two of these, the Takara matches the Toon aesthetic the best. But when you handle both of them, Fans Toys has die cast and is much heavier, and when you get into a lot of this, it does feel a little bit more high quality, high end because of that. Also, Fans Toys was able to get the coloring closer to what everybody would expect the first go around. Now this sort of opened the door as an opportunity for Cloud9 to come in with their Quake Blast. Now this figure is actually pretty cool. It looks a lot like you would expect for a G1-esque Shockwave. He has the chest, he has the head, he's got the arm cannon. The legs are the lower legs are a bit too beefy, but aside from that, this figure is great. And a lot of people do say that this knocks off the engineering of Fans Toys and their Quake Wave. And so, you know, I'm not really going to argue that or debate that, but that's what people say. Now we have the third-party Legends figures that are coming out for Shockwave, and we've had the New Age and their version, which oddly enough, it looks pretty darn close to a G1, but transforms into a Porsche for some reason, so that is a departure from what would be expected. This would have been another great opportunity as a Legends figure to make an accessory gun. So Iron Factory made their version of Shockwave, which actually transforms into a gun. It's a pretty good looking version of Shockwave, bigger, thicker, but it got knocked off. Both Mech Fans Toys and Pocket Toys did take a stab at using this mold, and hey, it all looks Iron Factory to me, and I think this is a pretty good version. I just wonder what Magic Square would do if they took a stab at this character. So looking to the future of this character, Shockwave, we know that Bumblebee movie aesthetic is kind of the direction that it's going, and a lot of the third-party companies, and even new third-party companies that are just starting out, are making Bumblebee-esque characters. So from the Bumblebee movie, this is what the Shockwave looks like, and of course, the chest, the head, the one eye, the gun on the arm, all of that really shows that it is a Shockwave. It is G1-esque, and I think this is the direction they're going to go. We're going to start seeing some of these popping up. We've got a Dream Factory movie version, live-action movie version coming of this character, and it's probably going to be a pretty awesome figure. And if you want to go into account every other knockoff that's been made of this guy, I don't have a record of that because there are so many, and there are this Walmart figure here, the $5 Walmart version. So definitely going to be more iterations of Shockwave coming. Maybe we're going to see him coming in the Dollar Tree bag clips. Let me know what you think about Shockwave, all the different iterations. What's your favorite version? Of course, which version did I miss? Like, subscribe, comment down below. Titanium Hanger out.